What are some of the weirdest ship designs ever made? There's nothing particularly odd about the ship itself, a standard tribal class with one U-boat sunk during WW1. What is odd is how the ship was constructed. The story begins on the 27th of October 1916 with HMS Nubian, whose bow was badly damaged in a torpedo attack, and was severed in a storm that evening. In November of that year, another ship of the same class, HMS Zulu, hit a mine laid by a German submarine that completely blew off the stern. Only the close proximity of a French destroyer meant the rest of the ship survived. Now, normally these two accidents would be the end of two warships, but with WW1 in full swing, the Royal Navy was desperate for anything that would be capable of keeping the channel clear of any German ships. Upon looking at one ship with a perfect stern, but no bow, and one with a perfect bow, but no stern, you can probably work out what was done. In July of 1917, HMS Nubian, a portmanteau of the original two names, became a member of the tribal class her two sisters had been a part of before her. Due to the very loose requirements of the class, every single ship was unique, so Nubian fit in perfectly. Although odd quirks were her two different sizes of smokestack, the hulls had been combined between the third and fourth, hence the difference, and slight inexplicable bulge of 89 mm, one of either Zulu or Nubian was wider than the other. The odd berth didn't hinder Nubian, sinking UC-50 in February 1918, and performing well throughout the remainder of the war. Another odd fact about the ship is that it is believed to be the only Royal Navy ship to have no casualties caused by the Spanish flu epidemic in 1919. Sadly, due to the stresses of wartime, HMS Nubian was scrapped on the 9th of December 1919, her job completed. It was the early 19th century. What was left of the British timber industry was under heavy threat from Canada, where forests were vast and timbers cheap. To protect native industry, Britain's government put tariffs on imported timber that at times more than doubled the price. However, due to a loophole in the law, timber from ships being scrapped was exempt from those tariffs. So the solution ingenious Canadian timber shippers came up with was to build disposable ships. These were wooden ships much larger than you would ever build normally, because the hogging stress from different parts of the ship being hit by different waves would strain the hull into uselessness within a few years, but that didn't matter, because they were only meant to make one voyage. The ship would be launched, sail across the Atlantic with a cargo of wood, and then be scrapped and have her hull timbers sold tax-free. Baron of Renfrew's story illustrates some of the problems with this approach. To keep costs down, the ships were usually pretty crudely built, and she had water in her hold all the way across the Atlantic. She ultimately broke up in a storm near London, although some of her timber may have been salvaged. No, not the cruise ship Carnival Vista, but the one carrying it above the water. It is called Boca Vanguard and is a semi-submersible ship built to carry other ships and oil platforms on top. The above is an actual picture, not a rendering or digital art, of Boca Vanguard carrying cruise ship Carnival Vista to a facility in Freeport, Bahamas to repair one azipod. They did this because the only dry dock where Carnival Vista fits was damaged a few months ago while Oasis of the Seas was there for a similar repair. They brought this ship near Freeport and Carnival Vista sailed on top of it. Then the Vanguard lifted itself with the Vista on top and sailed into the Freeport shipyard. The S. Arthur Talbot was one of 24 concrete ships built under contract from the United States Maritime Commission in 1942, by McCloskey and Company of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Built of steel reinforced concrete, they were constructed in Tampa, Florida starting in July of 1943. These ships were built at an incredible rate, with one being launched a month. The ships were named after pioneers in the science and development of concrete and came about for rather obvious reasoning. Just as steel had become scarce during the First World War, the advent of WW2 was again consuming the country's steel resources, and steel-reinforced concrete became one sought-out option. Two of the ships were sunk as blockships in the Allied invasion of Normandy. 9 more were sunk as breakwaters for a ferry landing at Kiptopeke, Virginia. 2 are wharves in Yaquina Bay in Newport, Oregon, and 7 are still afloat upon last word in a giant breakwater on the Powell River in Canada. I think it has to be the Hughes Glomar Explorer. What an amazing story and an odd, amazing ship. Give Project Azorian a search for the background and full story. The brief version is that a Russian submarine sank in 1968 and this ship was specifically built to recover it with the oversight of the CIA. The story has many interesting pieces such as how the US knew the precise location of the sub as well as how they were able to keep the real reason for the ship under wraps. To top it off, my wife's grandfather was a lawyer involved in the Hughes cover story, although he would never admit it, even after a photo was unearthed of him on the ship. His classic reply, "Isn't it amazing what they can do with Photoshop these days?"